So welcome to the One Society Network seminar series. My name is Ellen Rafferty, and I'm a senior health economist at the Institute of Health Economics and co-investigator and project manager of the One Society Network. And I'm back moderating this week. Thank you to Vic, who took over last week. And for those who are new to the seminar, our network, the One Society Network, is one of a number of emerging infectious disease modeling networks. And it consists of researchers from across Canada working to understand the broad multi-sectoral impacts of infectious diseases and the related public health policies. And this introductory seminar series aims to give a broad overview of those dynamic connections. And I think we've had really good examples of that throughout, and another good one today. So just before we begin, some brief housekeeping. Participants will be muted throughout the webinar, but feel free to put your comments in the chat. If you have any questions, you can put those in the Q&A, and you can put them throughout the presentation. I'm sure Bryce is really excited to hear some of your questions, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. And today's seminar is titled "The Impact of Threshold Decision Mechanisms of Collective Behavior on Disease Spread." And I'm pleased to welcome our presenter, Dr. Bryce Morsky. And Dr. Morsky is an applied mathematician and postdoctoral fellow at Queen's University who develops mathematical models of biological and social systems. His research program is primarily concerned with behavioral, ecological, and evolutionary processes, often in a game theoretical framework, and spans a variety of settings, including infectious diseases, as we'll see today, social norms, and public good games. So I'll hand it over to Bryce to take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ellen. So I'm going to talk about a model, or actually a few models I've been working on with Troy and Felicia and my former postdoctoral advisor, Errol Akchai. So the title is "The Impact of Threshold Decision Mechanisms of Collective Behavior on Disease Spread." It's a bit of a mouthful. You could also say it's sort of tipping point models. The idea here is to take the classic epidemiological models and incorporate some kind of social behavior, where individuals will engage in social distancing when the risks are high, and if other people are also engaging in it. Okay, so the basic idea behind this, and this applies not just to epidemiological models, but a whole bunch of other models as well, is that social behavior really drives a lot of biological physical systems. It's not just the biological aspect of it, but like particularly our human social behavior. Because we're a hypersocial species. Things like cultural practices make a difference, social institutions, whether formal or informal, the economic circumstances of individuals, and even our own psychology can drive these social dynamics that can determine how a disease spreads. And so our interest here was to couple these and see what kind of results we get, and what would that imply for public health policy. So what's the best decisions, public policy, given how social dynamics interact? So there are a few key aspects of social dynamics that we're interested in, or that I think that are pertinent. So to begin with, social epidemiological modeling has been done before. There are a lot of great examples of this. With how social dynamics and government intervention can work together. One particular one that I'm quite familiar with from graduate school is with vaccination decision making. Individuals can decide to vaccinate depending on their perceived risks of the vaccine and of the disease. And this also depends on what their risks are, depending who they interact with and who they don't. Game theory can play a role here in that there's a social dilemma that individuals could not vaccinate because they believe the risk is low, and they can free ride off of others vaccinating. So this, so game theory, social considerations are really important in determining whether you can halt disease, whether you can get people to vaccinate or social distance, for example. There are some recent papers on how the awareness of the disease can impact behavior. So in these models, individuals can know, how many people are infected or dead, and they respond to it. In the Toxbird case, individuals are forward-looking, they're selfish, they want to avoid getting sick, and but they also want to go out. So there's some cost to distancing, and they can basically predict. They look, well, things are going to get really worse, so then we'll stop going out, and this can be sufficient to flatten the curve. So some interesting optimal control that's done that kind of work. There's also the White's paper from 2020, and this is short-term awareness of fatalities, so individuals know what the current death rate is, and they respond to that. And one of the interesting things there, of many, is that there's this lag-driven oscillation. So individuals will reduce their will social distance. If the death rate's high, then it goes down, and they relax things, and then death rate increases as a response, and it goes on like that. So awareness of the disease and how people respond to that awareness is a key thing. Another thing is the belief. So people may not be aware of the actual behavior. They could be incorrect, and tied with that are social norms. Now, social norms are Christina Bicchieri calls them the grammar of society. It's the unwritten rules of our life. These are just informal type of things. They're often seen as coordination mechanisms, particularly by Bicchieri, that will get people to either coordinate on one behavior or another. They can lead to harmful outcomes and can be difficult to dislodge, but they can also be good as to coordinate behavior. So it depends if the behavior is something you want to coordinate on or not. Some of my own work in this field shows that false beliefs coupled with social norms can coordinate behavior. Essentially, what they can do is they can act as a catalyst, pushing you to potentially a better, or maybe potentially a worse off situation. So beliefs are really important, and social norms, conforming with other people or however that may be. Another key important aspect is heterogeneity. So in some of the COVID models, there's Gomez and her group have looked at heterogeneity and susceptibility to transmission. And they show how that can lower the herd immunity threshold. Essentially, those who are sick or those who are more susceptible get sick early on, and they're kind of removed from the susceptibles. There's also, of course, heterogeneity in contact patterns and age structure can also dramatically affect things. Related to what I was mentioning with the vaccination decision-making earlier, you can have, if you have heterogeneity in contact patterns, this can sort of resolve the free rider problem and essentially effectively contain the disease, because those who have neighbors who are sick, locally it's highly dangerous for them, so they vaccinate, and that protects the rest of the population. Even though, if it was a mean field model where everyone's mixing together, there's really only a few people who are sick. Now, the heterogeneity we're going to look at is heterogeneity in, we could do these other things as well, but primarily we're looking at heterogeneity in behavior. So we have those who are very compliant with the social distancing norm, like, okay, I should social distance because other people are doing it, and others who are not going to care what other people do. There could be heterogeneity in the cost of social distancing as well. So that's the kind of heterogeneity we're primarily interested in. Another aspect is group dynamics. So, of course, behavioral interventions are influenced by political affiliation. There's some recent papers on this. And, it's not just whether belief, if it's effective or not, but also if your own social group is doing that too. So you want to imitate others who are like you. This is related to the idea of homophily, you know, likes. You want to imitate those people who are like you. Oh, and one other thing I want to mention before I move on about heterogeneity. The heterogeneity in responses have been noticed in experimental models where people play these public, these ultimatum games. And you know, they can donate or not, and it depends on what they expect other people to do. And then those who are, you know, who will never cooperate. There are those who are very cooperative. There are those who will cooperate only if other people cooperate, and maybe, you know, cooperate just the same amount. So there is this variation in the population of how people respond to these games. Okay, so these are the 5 sort of key modeling pieces we want to put in. We're going to take this basic epidemiological SEIR model and put in some of these things and see what kind of stuff we get. So social dynamics, awareness, individuals can know what the, you know, what the infection rate is. Beliefs, maybe they don't, you know, they know what other people do, but there's perhaps some lags. They learn later. There's a lag before they, you know, realize what other people are doing. Risk assessment. They're going to assess the risks. They're going to weigh the risks of getting sick, but also the risks of not conforming to others' behavior or not conforming to their group's behavior. And finally, heterogeneity, when there's heterogeneity in behavior of individuals. Okay, so let's get to the model. We have this basic SEIR-S model. So we have susceptible individuals. They can, you know, when they interact with infectious individuals, they can become exposed. They're then exposed. This happens at a rate beta times gamma p. Now, beta is just a parameter. Gamma p, or say GP, I'll get to a little bit later. This is the function that's determines it's related to how much social distancing you do. So the more social distancing you do, G of P gets smaller, and so transmission is reduced. And then once you're exposed, you become infectious after a period of time. So this happens at rate delta, and then infectious become recovered at rate gamma. And we also consider the case where recovery can become susceptible again, particularly now when you've got a lot of resusceptibility coming. It's an important aspect as well. So we look at the cases sometimes where alpha is 0 and sometimes when there is a small alpha. All right, so that's the basic SEIRS model. We've added this G of P, and then we're also going to talk about the dynamics for P, how P changes over time. But first, let's talk about the transmission kinetics to get an idea of how the social distancing can reduce transmission. So here we have susceptible individuals, S, plus infectious individuals, and they can meet and they can form a couple, they're together, and that's where the disease can be transmitted to the susceptible individual. So this happens at rate rho plus, and at rho minus, they break apart. So rho plus, the two meet, and it can be spread, and rho minus, they break apart. When they're together at rate phi, the infectious individual can infect the susceptible individual, and you get 2 infectious individuals. Now you assume this happening numerous times over the day. We can find the equilibrium value, that's C bar, and this can give us our transmission rate. So from here we have the transmission then. We get this one term, phi over rho minus plus phi. We're going to define this as beta. So what we're going to assume is that the behavior reduces rho plus. The social distancing doesn't change rho minus, so you still have some regular amount of time you are interacting with individuals. It is whether you're actually going to go out and interact with people or not. And we're going to assume that phi is still fixed for now. So phi could be the mask wearing, or hand washing and those kind of things. Okay, so beta basically is just this phi over rho minus plus phi, and our rho plus is going to be our G of P. So rho plus is going to change depending on the infection rates and or the number of infectious in the population, the current number, as well as what everyone else is doing, or I should say, the individual's belief of what everyone else is doing. Yeah, so this is the part that's affected by behavior. Okay, so now how does this reduce the behavior? So the P is just a degree of non-pharmaceutical transmission reducing behaviors. It's a value between 0 and 1. And as I said, as P increases, the transmission rate decreases. We consider two different kind of standard functions for this. One is 1 minus eta P. In that case, eta is the sort of effectiveness of the behavior. If eta was 1, then, and P goes to 1, then you could completely reduce transmission as everyone's staying home. But we're going to assume that it's, a bit less than 1, or at least somewhat less than 1. So there's like some minimal amount you have to at least go out and do. So you can, there still be some transmission. The other form is 1 over 1 plus eta P. This is just a nonlinear GFP, a nonlinear response, a reduction in transmission based by when people engage in behavior. There's some qualitative differences. I mean, if you look at the time series, they look a little bit different. But I think the basic results still hold whether we use either one. Okay, now on to the social dynamics. So we're going to assume individuals know how many are infectious in the population. They have some belief about what others are doing, and they're going to weigh the risks and costs, both social and material, to engaging in the transmission reducing behavior. So it's cost of going out, cost of not going out. The cost of going out is getting infected. Then there's the social cost or benefit from doing what other people are doing. Well, there's a cost for not doing what other people are doing, and a benefit for doing that. And basically, the behavior changes to increase utility. So if I engage in the behavior more and increase my utility, then I'll do so. Now, more specifically, we're looking at the susceptible's utility. So we're going to assume that the exposed, infectious, et cetera, are just have some behavior. There's no difference among them. But among susceptible individuals, they are going to determine whether they're going to distance or not. And they have two parts to this utility, this risk assessment calculation. One is material utility. So this is the risk of getting the disease plus the cost of engaging in the behavior. So it's minus beta GPI minus CP. C is the cost. And then there's also relational utility. So one way to think of material and relational utility is like material utility might be I go to a restaurant, I get a sandwich. The sandwich is my material utility. Relational utility is I go with a friend. So it's things like warm glow you get from doing a social interaction or doing something with other people. It could also be guilt. If I do a behavior that's bad, then I may feel guilt for it. So that's relational utility here. And it's a cost. Well, we actually consider two different relational utilities, but for this one, it's a cost for deviating from the perception of others' behavior. So if you deviate from what Q is what you believe other people are doing, you pay a cost. And theta is the amount of cost so it's like the social cost you pay. So it's the weighting of the relational utility. And from this, you get your total utility. And the idea is to they're going to try to improve that, make it higher. Okay, that's one way of looking at utility. Don't deviate from what you think other people are doing, or the more you deviate from what other people are doing, the worse you are. So they're going to balance this, right? They're going to balance deviation and also the material risk, right? If no one's engaging in the behavior, but infections are high, I'm going to start engaging in it because even though I may be paying some cost to social distance while other people are not social distancing, and pay a cost for social distancing, material cost, I'll reduce the risk of getting infected. I'll reduce the beta GPI cost. Okay, So another common way of doing, or another way of doing utility that we were considering, I don't know if it's necessarily common, is where you get a payoff that's the cost for engaging in behavior is less than the perception of others' behavior. And you get a benefit for engaging in it more. So P is my behavior, Q is what I believe other people do. If I social distance more than them, I get this warm glow. I feel like I'm a good person. I'm helping prevent the spread of disease. And it's weighted also by what other people are doing. So if few people are distancing, then I don't feel that good for distancing more than they are. But if a lot of people are, then it's more valuable. So this is another form of it. You get either positive or either utility or disutility, relational utility depending on what your behavior is. Okay. So given those utilities, then we have to determine what, like the dynamics for P, the distancing behavior. So we'll call this F. This F is just going to be this the dynamics. Epsilon here is the speed of it, the rate of change. We primarily consider reasonable rates of change to be similar to the other parameter values. If recovery is on the range of a week or two, then maybe changing your social dynamics should be about the same. Anyhow, so then going from there, we have two models of changing behavior. So we have a best response and a replicator dynamics. So these are the two ones we choose. We get similar qualitative results, either one, but we wanted to explore the different ways of doing this model. First with best response. So this is basically, BR just means the best response. What's the best thing to do given current number of infectious individuals, the current, my current behavior, and what other people are doing. And then in this case, it's a well, we make it a smooth function varying between the two behaviors, but basically there's a threshold. So if depending on what other people are doing and what you believe other people are doing and what the infectious rate is, number of infections are, then you either distance or not. But we use a sigmoidal curve to model that behavior, that switching. The other way of looking at these kind of dynamics are using the replicator equation. Now, this is commonly used in mathematical biology. It's a canonical evolutionary game theory equation, I would say. And basically, this is the rate is P, so the degree, the frequency of or degree of the behavior, times the difference of the utility of engaging that behavior minus the average utility. That's U bar, which you can rearrange to P times 1 minus P, and then the difference between them, between engaging in the behavior, which is UI 1P, and UI 0P. Sorry, that should be I1Q. In much of our models, we assume individuals do know the correct answer, or they do know the correct behavior of everyone, hence why I have P in there. Okay, so returning back to the best response function, this is one I think I'll be talking mostly about and showing you most of the results for. This is the form of the sigmoidal curve. I mean, we could use other things as well, with like error functions or something like that. But this is a common one used in evolutionary game theory for selecting different strategies. Kappa here is determines how steep the curve is from switching from one thing to the other. But this is a kind of a standard form. I'll show you sort of an image of it that maybe helps you get the idea. So here, this is related to the behavior of others. As it increases, then so do you respond appropriately. This kind of model has been used in social science starting in the 70s, and then Granovetter did a lot of this in the 80s. applying these models. They're called tipping point models. And they've been used to understand things like innovation, residential segregation, placement of ethnic restaurants, how riots start, how strikes then start, and voting patterns as well, voting behavior as well. So the way to think about this is, so the blue curve is this sigmoidal curve, and the gray curve is the diagonal. And if where they cross in the very middle at 0.5 in this figure, that's sort of an unstable point. If Q is a bit higher than that, then your behavior as a response is even higher than Q. And you kind of cobweb up, you move up towards this equilibrium at the high equilibrium at P and Q are 1. Or if you're below that threshold, the middle threshold, you go down. So if you think that 25% of the individuals are engaging in the behavior, you engage in even less. So it's a bistable system. You either go to one side or the other. Now, false beliefs can affect this. So as I mentioned in the introduction, previous work that I have done was looking at how false beliefs can sort of shift this curve and work as a catalyst to get you to one side or the other. Anyhow, this is the kind of model, this is the kind of dynamic we're using for the social dynamic. So you'll jump to one side or the other. Now, the number of infected individuals and the behavior of others are going to determine how this curve moves, and so what side you're going to end up on. All right, in summary, these are the set of equations we'll be looking at, and I'll talk a bit about some conditions of, when we'll get certain equilibria or not, but I'll also show you a lot of figures to give you a sense of what this looks like. Let's start off though with time series. So this is for the SEIR model, so there's no resusceptibility. And we get this switching, like you turn it on. So P, so this is the green curve here, individuals engage in the behavior, and it's blunting the spread of the disease. So once there's the infectious number reaches a threshold, because we assume everyone's starting off not social distancing, but once enough individuals are infected, then they engage in the behavior. And this reduces the spread, which reduces the number of infectious individuals, which then causes them to change their behavior, not social distance anymore, and causes the infections to rise and on. So you get these pulses of behavioral responses. They're not optimal, right? They're, we're not, there are models, there's a recent one by Morris this year that looks at optimal, or maybe it was last year, that looked at optimal control of these kind of distancing, if a government can induce that. But here, these are not optimal. And in fact, that's going to become an issue and explain some of the results I will show you. Anyhow, so you get these pulses of responses. In this case, for this model, we have the nonlinear response, the linear response. The nonlinear response, these green curves are smoother, but they still effectively act the same. Slowing down the spread for a while, and then turning off and doing it again. One way to sort of see that the switching behavior visually is that we have this in the switching condition. So in this figure here, I have the number of infectious individuals, or it's the frequency of infectious individuals and the frequency of the behavior P, and this is plotting those two values over time. So you start off with very few individuals engaging it and very few infectious. As infections increase to about 0.06 here, then it shoots up. More people are getting infected, but they're starting to engage in behavior, and then it stops. It stops the or blunts the spread of the disease, and it takes a while. There's a stickiness. It takes a while before the population moves back to dropping the P below. So the number of infections decrease, and then P drops down, and you get this sort of behavior again and again. I increases, P responds, I starts decreasing, but P still staying high because there's a stickiness. People want to do what other people are doing. They want to, once they're all distancing, they have this relational utility part that keeps them social distancing. But as I goes down enough, or once it passes another threshold, then the relational utility is not as big of an effect as the cost of not going out. And so then we see it shoot down, and then it happens to everyone, and then that becomes the new normal, and everyone obeys, and now everyone's not going out, now everyone is not social distancing, so everyone is going out. And it takes a while again before infections have to arise again before we can knock ourselves into the behavior again. On the left-hand side, I just have the mathematically written this condition. Now you see this behavior whether you have the linear or nonlinear. It's very clear in this in the linear when G is linear in this case. G is nonlinear, you can get some somewhat different figure, but the basic idea holds. We get this it's like a switch. We turn it on, turn it off, and depends on as I increases, we turn it on, and then I decreases until it reaches a threshold, and then P goes off, and on and on. Okay. Another thing I would like to talk about is the sensitivity to the efficacy. Now, this was a bit surprising. We assume as efficacy increases, we'll have fewer susceptibles. We'll be better at stopping the spread of the disease. But this is not the case, or not the case for all of the parameter space of all the range of possible efficacies. So here is when eta is 0.8. This again is a linear reduction in transmission. So we see two pulses here. Okay, so it reduces things. Maybe you can't see it as well in this figure, but we actually have a high, even though efficacy has increased, we have more, efficacy has increased, we have more susceptible individuals. We got a third pulse. We don't always get that as we increase eta. The number of susceptibles increase or change non-monotonically. You can see that in this figure here. So when eta is very low, okay, this makes sense. No one's engaging in behavior. Most people are getting infected. Okay. And then when eta is, gets sufficiently effective, then people start engaging in peace, or peace goes to 1. And people start engaging in it, and the number of susceptibles is increasing. This is this red curve. The number of susceptibles at the end of the pandemic or epidemic is increasing. But this curve turns down for higher eta. And then we get this like oscillatory kind of outcome as we change eta. Now what this is the suboptimal turning on and turning off of the behavior. So it's not true that it's always better to have a higher efficacy, because individuals are not, again, they're not optimally responding to it. The social dynamics are leading to these pulsed responses. This behavior also happens when we change the cost. And we see this throughout the different versions of the model, the different utilities and stuff like that. Okay, we can see this also in this figure. So this figure is not for the previous parameter values. There were a lot more, very non-monotonic there. But this is, I think, an easier figure to see because there's only 3 peaks. So these are just different, this is a different theta, I believe. So we can see how the changing in eta and the cost relate to one another. So for low etas, we're increasing it, the efficacy, efficacy, we get more and more susceptibility. So it's good, it's working. But then after a critical point, it's, then we get this, these highs and lows. this non-monotonic response outcome. This also happens with theta. So here I'm varying theta and eta, and we can see that. This is at a different angle than the previous figure. With 3D figures are not always the the clearest thing, but I think this is kind of the clearest I can do with this kind of outcome. But I had to change our orientation to better read it. So again, we see that eta, initially it's good. We increase eta, we're getting more susceptible individuals. So fewer people got sick. Great. But after a certain point, then we're either like overshooting the behavioral response or undershooting it. It's not optimal, and it's actually can make things worse off if we're more effective. And theta has a similar kind of effect. As we're when eta is really high, a low theta or a high theta is kind of better rather than an intermediate one. So it's I think it's like these are counterintuitive results. Just gonna check my time. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on to talking about heterogeneity. So unimodal and bimodal distributions of sensitivity to the risks and costs. I'm not going to show you the results for unimodal because basically they're the same as the homogeneous models that I've just showed you. So if you imagine there's a distribution, most individuals have theta of something, and then we have some that have different thetas. If it's unimodal, this basic story is the same. If it's bimodal, though, we can get some different results, interesting results. So this is, a way to think about this is you have some individuals have a high cost to going out, for example, or sorry, to social distance, and others don't. Or some are very receptive to the social norms, and others are not and don't care what other people are doing. So they can, again, there's these variations in either the relational or the material costs parameters. Okay, so here's a time series for the bimodal heterogeneity. And in particular here, what I'm interested in is looking at the variation in the population. So what proportion are highly sensitive to infections or the norms? So here it's highly sensitive to infections. This is the cost. So 70% of the individuals have I guess have a lower cost to social distancing, so they're more sensitive to infections, and 30% have a high cost, so they're more willing to just go out because the cost of distancing is high. So the purple line here are those who are more willing to engage in the behavior. It's as you'd expect. They're engaging it more and more rapidly willing to do it than those who are not. But those who are not still do engage to some degree. But one interesting thing is that as we increase the number of highly sensitive individuals, you'd think this would make things better off, but not necessarily. So we've increased the number of highly sensitive individuals, and they're better able to blunt the spread of the disease, which means that the other players, the ones who are less sensitive to infections, don't even bother social distancing, or don't do it very much. You can see they've had these false starts in this teal-like curve for player 2. False starts, they're about to respond, but then it goes down because the highly sensitive individuals are the majority, and they're able to suppress the spread of the disease. How does this affect the total outcome as we see very different parameters? Well, sorry, first I want to mention, explain, we still have a switching condition, and just one has a lower threshold than the other. So the sensitive ones of this red curve, they're more susceptible to engaging the behavior than the blue ones. Those are, they require more infectious individuals before they'll act. How does this affect things? Well, we can look at the impact of this bimodal heterogeneity for varying the efficacy eta, as well as the degree of S1 individuals. So this is the degree of sensitive individuals, those who will engage in the behavior, or will more easily engage in the behavior, is S1. So again, when eta is low, so this sort of makes sense. So if eta is 0.5, 0.6 looks about, as we're increasing the number of sensitive individuals, we get more susceptible individuals. Okay, that makes sense. They're able to stop the spread of disease. But we get this non-monotonicity again for a high effectivity that, in fact, it's not always, I mean, it may not be as clear on this figure, but it's not always good to have very norm-sensitive individuals. Having some who are not sensitive to the norm, like who are not sensitive to engaging in the behavior, can actually make us better off. Okay, I think I'm running low on time, so I'll quickly talk about the SEIRS model. So this is when we can have resusceptibility. So basically, we have two different cases. If R naught is greater than 1, this beta over gamma is greater than 1. But if R naught times 1 minus eta is less than 1, so this is for the nonlinear reduction. You have a similar equation for the linear reduction. So this is for the linear reduction. There's a similar equation for the nonlinear one. But essentially, if effectiveness is high enough, then the idea is that the behavior can stop the spread of the disease. Great. And if the sensitivity to the norm, to others' behavior, is greater than the material cost, then we get a situation where there's a sole stable equilibrium in the population. And this is where everyone's susceptible, and everyone engages in the behavior. So even though there's no disease, everyone's locked in because of the relational utility cost. So yeah, everyone engages in the behavior, even though the disease is suppressed, and this social pressure alone can sustain this. Now, if R naught times 1 minus eta is greater than 1, however, then we get two different cases. So if the material cost is greater than the relational cost or social cost, then there is a sole endemic state where nobody engages in behavior. So yeah, and then if, however, the cost is less than theta, then there's also this endemic state with a higher frequency of susceptibles, and everyone engages in the behavior. Okay, so in summary, the main takeaways are that social dynamics can drive these oscillations and temporarily level off transmission. And additionally, there are these sort of sticky social dynamics due to the utility of the conformity relation utility, where you get a benefit from being like other people. And so this can prevent you from the population moving to the optimal case, the optimal response. It will prevent you from the population from social distancing when they should, and stops them from relaxing when they should, and stops and stop the distancing when they should. There's also this non-monotonic impact of different parameters and the initial conditions, or like initial types when you have the bimodal distribution or bimodal model. And the idea, I think the main takeaway is that the best case can be sort of counterintuitive. Now, I also have some results not included here on beliefs. So up to now, I've been assuming that everyone knows what what the population is doing, but you can also have incorrect beliefs. There could be positive or negative bias, for example. So you think that more people are distancing than are or fewer, as well as there could be a lag in learning the true behavior. So I did look at the not shown here, when Q lags P. This is another replicator type equation. And what this essentially does is make things worse off. They're not able, again, to respond optimally. Once people engage in the behavior, they're slow to disengage, depending on what the rate of this is. but they're slow to disengage. And again, this means like there's a suboptimal response. Future directions are looking at asymptomatic transmission. In my head, I keep on saying asymptotic. Asymptomatic transmission and the behavior of these individuals. We've been looking at behavior of susceptible individuals, but what if the exposed individuals could infect them, have some degree of infection? Then I think the social dynamics will really matter, because for those individuals, they are only going to social distance based on, their calculation is only going to be based on, well, I mean, it depends. It depends on testing. Depends on if they know that they've already been infected or not. If they don't know that they've been infected, then their calculation is the same, because they still think they could be infected and they still have the same relation utility. But if there's, if they test positive, they know that they're positive, it's not worried about getting it again, and they know they're asymptomatic, then how do they respond? So then maybe the social dynamic matters much more, because what and the material utility portion is zero. It's already been adjudicated. So that's a potential thing to look at. Another higher order reaction kinetics. So we have like super spreading type of things that can happen. Doing simulations on a network might also be interesting, where individuals can spread along the network. So if some individuals are highly connected, some are not, they might be sorted in certain ways. We have this bimodal model, but we can imagine them also being sorted by that. So you're more likely to interact with those who you're interacted with. And in terms of also beliefs, you're more likely to see those who you interact with. There's some interesting work on this. There's an interesting term called information gerrymandering, where you gerrymandered who you see, and it determines what you know about the world and how you respond to it. So if you're in a bubble, then that will determine the dynamics. And also, next is to kind of look at interventions. How reduction transmission, conditional testing, what should public policy do given what I've shown and talked about today? And finally, whether there's further heterogeneity between the groups. So I was looking at heterogeneity in the figures I showed you here in the material cost. But there could be people who have heterogeneity in cost, but then also heterogeneity in who they interact with or who they imitate. And it's sort of related to what I was mentioning about a network type of model. And that might be a good way to approach this. All right, well, I believe I'm at time. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to seeing the questions.
Thanks so much, Bryce. Yeah, so we already have a few. The first one relates to vaccination, and had you considered inputting vaccination into the model? Because obviously there's a lot of behaviors, as you know, because you've done that work related to vaccination as well.
Absolutely. So adding in vaccination would be another great thing to put in. I've in fact played around a bit with doing that with essentially a group that's, imagining a group that's vaccinated and a group that's resistant to vaccinating, and looking at that. But that's very preliminary at the moment. But yeah, I mean, that's, I think, another important place to go.
Yeah, and I wondered if you were talking at the end there about having the similar, so having a large group of people who are very sensitive, and then reducing they're reducing transmission, so then the people who are not sensitive are going out doing what they're doing normally, if vaccination would have a similar rule.
Yeah, so some of the preliminary stuff had that, where that there were a few vaccine resistant people, it kind of was making things better off, because one of the issues is when you're engaging in this behavior, you're kind of, if you completely shut things off, then you'll still have a lot of susceptibles. So you're kind of slowly, bleeding susceptibles. And there's like an optimal degree of doing that. So if the people respond too well, or too resistant, it can be useful to have some individuals who are getting sick and spreading things to balance that. Yeah, so yeah, there was a bit of that in the preliminary work I was doing on with the vaccinated individuals. It's actually related to another project I did, not related with epidemiology, with this kind of thing, but with antibiotic resistance. And a way to control antibiotic resistance in sort of the framework I was using is theoretical, but was to kind of turn the antibiotic on and off, because if you get a competition between those who are resistant and bacteria resistant and non-resistant, then a better strategy is, instead of like win or lose, is to just mitigate things. So try to keep a low value, because you've kind of got competition between two different types. It can be an adaptive therapy can be better than one that's not. And it's basically playing to not lose versus playing to win, I think, is maybe a way of thinking about it.
Yeah, the dynamics there are so interesting. So we have another question or a comment, I guess, but it would be interesting to consider different groups with different norms. For example, one group could be more pro-social and more confident in public health messaging, while another is both skeptical of the effectiveness of social distancing. Furthermore, these groups may derive strong relational utility based on the norms within their own groups, as opposed to society as a whole.
Yeah, well, this is essentially what the bimodal one is. We have different costs, and it works out even if you have different thetas. So you have a group that has one theta, one that has one, it's like a higher one, and one has a lower one. A future way to go is to think of how well those groups are intertwined with one another. To what degree do they? So the imitation dynamics here, as I assume there, or some of the ones I've looked at, is that they imitate only those of their type. But maybe it's some sort of mix. And so far, I've assumed they all have the same beliefs about what the disease is like, which is probably surely not true. So they have different risk calculations, not just in what C is and theta is in this model, but I guess they'd have different beliefs of what I is, I guess, and different beliefs of what eta is. So like so much more of the calculation could be off. And since eta in particular has this interesting result when it's really high, maybe making heterogeneity in eta might particularly be interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that the beliefs are kind of at that overall level, and then within the groups you're still having those dynamics, or like people are basing what they do within their own group, but the beliefs at the higher level. So one question is, have you used a Bayesian approach, or have thought about using a Bayesian approach to calculating P?
Yeah, well, I think you mean like individuals determining what other people are doing. Yeah, I mean, there could be other. Yeah, that's why we made it sort of generic with F. What was the best way to update the behavior? Although, I mean, Bayes' rule in a continuous sense would be the same as the replicator equation. So I guess we kind of have that.
Right. The other thing I thought about is there any consideration to how people respond, or their utilities or costs over time? For each new way, for each new response, maybe the cost is higher to social distancing. Yeah,
I agree. I think that is definitely something that would be real, like a time-dependent cost. As people become, not time dependent, but
wave dependent or something. Yeah.
Yeah, or there's you only have so much distancing you can do, and then and then
you reach a threshold. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the Morris paper I mentioned, they do that. They when they find the optimal distancing that should be engaged in, they assume there's a finite length of distancing, like there's a finite amount we can do. And then we optimize given that. So they did assume a sort of a restriction that, individuals are in a distance, but they'll only distance for so long. We could do that.
Yeah.
Or just reduce its or as you said, like reduce, or either reduce its effectivity. So maybe people do it, but are less effective at doing it, or increasing the cost as it goes on, which I think would be very realistic.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Another question is, can we add a parameter that measures the effects of population level measures, like vaccination, on beliefs?
Oh yeah, so that beliefs are determined by, it would also be determined by the frequency of vaccinated. I guess it would almost be, if individuals can kind of predict if there's like a herd immunity, or if there's immunity from the people being vaccinated type of thing. Yeah, if you added that in, we could make the calculations more incorporating other things. We went with the kind of the simplest case first with just the infectiousness and a linear cost. Another thing is actually a nonlinear cost. But yeah, adding vaccinations in would open up changes for the risk assessment too. You also have like decision making on whether people become vaccinated or not too. You could have a threshold dynamic as well, where individuals vaccinate, and also vaccinate not just based on their perceptions of what's happening in the population, but if other people are vaccinating too, or other people in their group are vaccinating. Yeah.
I think this shows there's so many different ways that, behaviors and beliefs affect what we're doing every day. So it can make the models very, very complex, but even just delving into what you've done so far is so interesting, because I don't think a lot of epi models have, you see it, but haven't taken into that into account. And I think it really, as you've shown, affects the dynamics of the whole system. Okay, so I think that's time. So I want to thank you again, Bryce, for a great presentation, and thanks to everyone for attending today's seminar. So the next one is in fact next week. We've had a few in a row here. So just to let everyone know, and it will be on an overview of the dynamic connections between pandemics and interprovincial response. Specifically, the title is Spatial Allocation of Scarce COVID-19 Vaccines. When does an allocation rule based on relative population size, as we saw in Canada, perform well? And the speaker is Dr. Francois Castonguay. So I'm really looking forward to that. And thanks again.
Yeah, thanks everyone.